open it up to a question period. The Business Association has selected 3 or 4 questions, but we're not going to start the meeting by asking those questions. We're going to let you, the audience, ask particular candidates what you feel are the issues. You can ask of them individually or you can ask of them collectively. But we are going to ask the candidates to try to respond in a brief but accurate manner. Now, Eva, have I omitted anything that I should be bringing up here? Okay. The call upon Mr. Keith G. of the Canadian Christian Heritage Party, and he's going to speak to us first. Mr. G.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, today's political leadership reminds me of a story that I heard recently. A story of a businessman that wanted to congratulate a friend who had just been elected as Member of Parliament. So he called his local florist shop and ordered a bouquet of flowers sent to his friend. Later that day, he went to see his friend and was shocked to find that the florist had actually delivered a huge wreath with a banner reading, "Rest in Peace." The businessman was so outraged, he stormed out of the florist shop and gave the owner an earful. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted. "I ordered a big bouquet of flowers and you sent a wreath." "I'm sorry," replied the florist, "as large as the one you ordered. It wasn't too bad. Actually, the flowers meant for your friend are now surrounding one of his former taxpayers who just died." At a time when Canada is facing some of the most critical problems in this country's history, we have a government paralyzed by a lack of a moral foundation. There are many fine individuals representing various communities, but the threat of party discipline keeps them from doing the job that they were elected to do. One of the most important issues is that they have to vote party line, even if it is opposite from the wishes of those who they are elected to serve. All of the mainline parties share that fatal flaw. Foundation, a stone of clearly defined principles that guides the decision-making of each representative. It's missing, and you can clearly see where that has taken Canada today. We are faced with a federal debt of more than $400 billion. This debt burdens each of your children with $20,000 of debt before they are even old enough to hold a pen, never mind sign for a loan. As business people, you are directly affected by a lackluster economy, staggering under the weight of crippling taxes. How could we have fallen so far? For almost a century, a clear understanding that some things are right and other things are wrong gave Canada an unbroken record of progress and of prosperity. For the last 3 decades, we have moved away from those principles, and the results have been disastrous. There are no easy answers to get us out of this mess, but we will need to make some tough decisions, and I'm prepared to work for you and with you to give our children the kind of country they deserve. If we work together, I know that we can once again steer this country towards prosperity. For example, we can introduce zero-based budgeting for all government departments. We can downsize government bureaucracy. We can balance this budget within 5 years. I believe that we can reduce taxes. In fact, we have to, in order to stimulate our economy. One of the key roles of government is to create a climate which allows industry and commerce to flourish. But what we need to do most of all is to bring common sense back to the leadership of this country. That's what I'm offering you, honest, principled representation on your behalf in the House of Commons. After all, that's what democracy is all about, isn't it? Thank you, and God bless.
As you might have noted, that was a little over 3 minutes. And because we did change the format right now.
The next person gets 5.
That's a good try, Lloyd, but that's not going to work. No, we're going to try to be fair and keep it to 4. more. It would appear as though every one of the candidates here that are going to be speaking are probably going to require 4 minutes per party.
We'll come in under the budget in 3 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Federal Finance Minister from 1977 to 1979, during which period the national debt increased by 60%. It was a Liberal administration of which Mr. Craig-Cheney's party ran up the highest federal deficits. The Conservatives were elected in 1984. They failed to keep their promise, and in the intervening 9 years, Canadians witnessed a series of $30 billion deficits which dug Canada into a national debt hole of over $460 billion. The reason, the Conservatives will tell you, is that in the mid-'80s, Canadians were not much interested in tackling the national debt. The truth is that after the 1984 election, the Canadian public quickly lost confidence in the Conservatives, prompted by a series of embarrassing ministerial resignations. John Fraser, Robert Coates, Marcel Masse, Suzanne Blaise-Grenier, Andre Champagne, Sinclair Stevens, Andre Bissonnette. The embarrassments continued. The Conservatives hit rock bottom in the polls. Their deficit reduction plans were pushed aside in a desperate effort to regain the confidence of the Canadian public and win re-election in 1988. If we're to win the war against the debt and the deficit in this country, if we're to get our financial house in order so that we can maintain federal funding of health care, advanced education, the guaranteed income supplement for seniors, and other social safety nets Canadians demand, we must elect politicians committed to correcting our financial woes, politicians you can trust. Can you trust politicians who for the past year and a half stood idly by while Canada's 2 major air carriers have been locked in a dispute that could well result in the death of one or both of those airlines? Politicians who have stood idly by, paralyzed with fear that if they made a decision, it would be seen as a choice between Quebec or Western Canada. Can you trust politicians who, in spite of court rulings to the contrary, created the Aboriginal fisheries strategy, of policy implications on fisheries management in Western Canada? Can you trust politicians to balance the books in the future when they can't even do it in an election year? The Reform Party has a plan to reduce the deficit in 3 years. We have a plan to make Parliament and parliamentarians more responsible to you, the voter. In this election, you do have a choice. You can vote for your grandfather and support one of the old line parties. Or you can vote for your children, for a new and prosperous Canada. You can vote Reform. You can vote John Cummins in Delta. Thank you.
Our timer informs me that he was under budget, but only in time. Our next candidate is the incumbent MP from Delta, the Honorable Dr. I shouldn't say the Honorable, but Dr. Stan Wilkie, the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much. I would like to express my appreciation and thanks to the Boston Business Association for sponsoring this meeting tonight. When I heard that they had called it, I expected this room to be full of Boston businessmen, but I see very few here, mostly people from the community, which is great. But I'm just real happy tonight to be able to stand before you and stand on my last 5 years record as your member of Parliament. I believe that I have served you in many ways, as my staff has done in both my offices here and in Ottawa. We have served you in many, many ways. We have communicated with you in many ways through letters, telephone calls, householders, television shows, whatever it may be. But I think more importantly that we have been listening to you, that we have been taking your messages back to Ottawa and presenting them there in the caucus, in the Parliament buildings, in the committee rooms, and making sure that the voice of Delta was being heard clearly in Ottawa, in our nation's capital. Of course, as many of you know, that this has not always caught me in good favor with my colleagues on both sides of the House. Remember my meeting with Prime Minister Mulroney. We had a discussion one Sunday morning at 24 Sussex Drive when I expressed to him the concerns that you had expressed to me about such things as the deficit, about Meech Lake, about OCA, about Senate appointments, and I think that perhaps this had some influence on the action of the party. I know that many of my colleagues in my party and across the floor in the House expressed similar sentiments, and they said, you know, we congratulate you on taking the stand which you did at that time. Also, I hope that you will remember my stand on the Charlottetown Accord. When I came home from Ottawa, I said that I would very much like to vote for the Charlottetown Accord, but as a British Columbian, I felt that it was not in the best interests of British Columbia or the people of Delta. As a result, I voted against the Charlottetown Accord at the time of the referendum. My opposition in the Reform Party will tell you that I did one thing in Ottawa, that I did a different thing in Delta. The motion that we voted on in Ottawa was just the wording of the referendum. It was not the referendum, but merely the wording. The people that voted against it was the Reform member and the Quebec Bloc and Alex Kendi and Mr. Nala. So all the rest of the members voted in favor of the wording which was presented. I'm also happy tonight to speak on behalf of my leader, Kim Campbell. This is an amazing British Columbian woman, the first woman Prime Minister from British Columbia. And I think that when you look at what she has been able to do since she ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party, it is indeed in government by downsizing cabinet, by making remarks and promises on MP's pension, which we all agree, many other changes which she has promised to do in the way in which Canada will be governed. She's also promising to make it easier to do business in Canada. And I fully support her stand on the deficit reduction. The Reform Party says they'll do it in 3 years. I say that is impossible. I say that our plan of 5 years is much more reasonable, and it will not have the drastic effects that the 3-year plan would have of the Reform Party or the Never Never Land of the Liberal Party. And we will be working together to produce good jobs in Canada. When we hear from the Liberals, we will hear more of the same old stuff, borrow money to make temporary jobs that we will have to pay for in the future. And the Reform Party, again, with their slash and burn tactics in deficit reduction, no long-term plan, no thought of the fallout from the strategies which they have presenting to us tonight. And so, with the cuts and the transfers to the provinces, which they are talking about, indeed our social programs are in danger. And so on October the 25th, I am asking you to remember an experienced person, a sincere person, a person who has shown common sense in his relationship and his representation in Ottawa, and a party which I believe has the best plan for the future. Stan Wilby, Conservative, on October 25th. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilby. I'd now like to call on Mr. John Waller of the National Party. By the way, you were on time.
Thank you. Pleasure telling me a little bit.
30 seconds early.
Good evening, and thank you to the Boston Business Association for inviting us all here tonight. As I sat and watched the big debate last night, a couple of images went through my head. Young children in older bodies squabbling over who said what about whom and why. A second-rate sitcom with no sex, but lots of violence. I have told lots of people about the debate, and the consensus seems to be that by not being there, Mel Hurtig was the clear leader. Being serious, that whole spectacle disturbed me. It was obviously a setup by the media, and it was obvious from the clips that we were shown later that they were looking for blood, looking for someone to make a fool of themselves. for someone to deliver that 3-second knockout blow. And I asked myself, is that all there is? And the answer is no. There is much more. When you go to the polls on October the 25th, you have a heavy responsibility. If you think that you must vote for the winner, and that your vote is a waste of time if you don't vote for the winner, I'm sorry, but I cannot agree with you. If you do vote that way, by the way, vote for me, because I'll be the winner. The problems that this country has do not magically disappear on October the 26th. And I would prefer to think that Canadian electors are intelligent enough to vote for someone, to vote for the person who represents a party with good policies, which I know the National Party of Canada has, and for the person who can best represent you, the voter, someone who will listen. I was once told that I had to be careful, or I might bring integrity back into politics. The National Party has released its plan to put the country back to work. This strategy, a 7-page document, details the role of government, identifies the target industries, and stresses the need for training. It discusses financing and alternate sources of capital, and details changes in the federal tax policies needed to stimulate the investment of billions of RRSP and savings dollars into Canadian-owned businesses. Debate was tax reform. The National Party of Canada is committed to the removal of the GST. How will we replace that $17.4 billion? That too has been laid out in detail. It's a 24-page sum, but obviously I can't go through it here. But copies of both these documents are available from me or from one of my hard-working volunteers, and I encourage anyone in business or anyone who wants to save this country to take home copies and to read them. Because then I know that you will vote for me and the National Party of Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Weller. You were definitely under time. Well, we'll give you a little bit of leeway a little bit later on.
Thank you.
I know some empty chairs up here, and you're more than welcome to come up here, folks.
You don't like.
Sir, if you'd like to come up, there's a stage in line.
I like to view the scenery.
Okay. The next candidate I'd like to call upon is an independent candidate. His name is Benny Wolf.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we're going to work together to make things better in Canada, because Canada is the best place in the world. And I want to go to Ottawa to represent all of you in a non-partisan way, so that everyone in this room and in this community will get equal representation. So you ask, who is Benjamin Wolf that wants to represent you? What does he offer? Does he have any vision? Well, here's the proof, ladies and gentlemen. My friend Mr. Murphy over there from the Delta Optimist will dig out the Delta Optimist of October 12th, 1989. 4 years ago, I was quoted. Benjamin was quoted, "We feel that if the government gets its house in order, brings down the interest rates and their spending, we can work together to bring the deficit down. But we do not need to put GST, this unfair burden, onto the taxpayers and pay the taxes." Yes, that was 4 years ago. The Conservative government finally started to bring interest rates down 2 years ago, and approximately 3 years ago, they finally started to cut their spending. So what else does Benjamin Brian Wolf offer you, your family, your children? What kind of vision does he have for the future? Is he a man that can come up with a positive vision? I'm sorry, but I'm not full of rhetoric or promises, just issues. And you ask me, what are the issues about this election? Well, number one, it has to be the debt. And I urge all of you to pick up September 27th issue of Maclean's magazine that just came out, and you'll learn blow by blow where the money is spent and where the money comes in. Another issue is taxes. I here have one of the most deadly, most sickening posters that you as a taxpayer will look at. And this is available to every one of you. This is repulsive, repugnant, and you will understand why I got on the streets in 1989 to try to stop this GST. It's all right in here, ladies and gentlemen. What's another issue? It has to be government. Too much interference in our daily lives. How many times a day is government interfering in your business? Is government interfering in your bedrooms? Immigration has to be another issue. Bureaucracy. So let's look at the good points that we can look at. We here in Canada need more incentives. We need more encouragement. We need a 15% flat rate income tax, so the harder you work, the more money you make, the more you take home rather than the more you give to government. We have to say to government, we're not giving you no more. If you want to raise taxes, you can raise it 0.11 of 1%. We have to have all GST revenue applied to the accumulated $450 billion debt before the IMF comes in and tells you your pension is no longer payable, your Medicare program is disbanded, and your schooling system, you'll have to start paying it yourself. And most of all, crime, ladies and gentlemen. We must bring back capital punishment for first-degree murder. We must tighten up the Young Offenders Act so there is, there you go, 4 minutes is up. So punishment fits the crime. And most of all, we must preserve Canadian heritage so that we can all be proud of Canada. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wolf brought his own timer, and I give you the marks for that. Very good. You've now going to be borrowed for the balance of the meeting. The next candidate I'd like to call upon is Mr. Lloyd Mcdonald of the New Democratic Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The platform of each of our parties, I think, is well known to you, and our party, like the other parties, has been printed and is broadly distributed. I think it's important to remember that none of us can vote for the people you see on the that you saw on the leadership debate last night. You can't vote for the Prime Minister of Canada. In fact, you can't even vote for parties. All you can do is vote for people who are sitting here and for candidates who aren't here. And so because of that, I think it's important for you to bear in mind who it is you're voting for when you vote for me, Lloyd Mcdonald. I want you to know what you get when you get me. I don't think we can expect anymore, these days are long gone, that when you vote for a candidate and who is a member of Parliament, that they're going to deliver to this riding large public works programs. Government isn't going to be able to work that way in the future. We have to be able to deliver something else as members of Parliament. I bring something more important than fighting for fairness in Ottawa. I bring something special to Delta. In the area of transportation, environment, and our traditional industries of fishing and farming, and in education, we have 3 levels of government working with 3 separate visions. This is crazy. There is only one Delta. We should have one vision for Delta. I pledge to work with one vision and with each level of government working for that one vision. My career in the last 20 years has dealt with working with complex social and political situations to bring people together to create visions, identify needs, identify plans, and initiate action. That's what I do. My doctorate in educational planning has brought me into a situation where I have 20 years of experience working with people to bring about one vision, many people. I've already taken action on this pledge. I've talked to nearly all of the politicians in Delta and Surrey regarding our transportation needs. They agree we need one vision and we should be working together. I've worked with the chair of the Board of Governors of Kwantlen College in bringing about an expanded education service to Delta. But there still remain 3 visions of education, one for each level of government. There is much to do. Lack of coordination and cooperation has added to the cynicism of voters, and I found this on the doorstep, and I think the other candidates have as well. We need cooperation and coordination to bring about good government in Delta. This isn't a false promise. This is a promise I can keep. It's a promise for which I ask you to hold me accountable. I ask for your support, not only in providing good government in Ottawa, but better government at home in Delta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. And our last candidate that we're going to have addressing us this evening is from the Liberal Party, Karen Morgan.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to thank the Boston Business Association and Bob Palmer for organizing tonight's debate. 9 years ago, the Conservative Party, under Brian Mulroney, was elected to govern the largest majority in Canadian history. Rarely has a government in Canada been given such an opportunity to demonstrate vision and progress. And rarely has a government failed so badly. Today, almost 2 million Canadians are out of work. Youth unemployment is 20%, and the national debt has tripled to close to $500 million. All across the country, Canadians appear to have lost hope in their future and in their children's future. Tragically, a recent Canadian survey has shown that even our children are troubled as they sense the insecurity and discomfort of their parents. My friends, without a vision of our place in the emerging New World economy, we will continue to struggle from recession to recession. We deserve better. The number one priority for a Liberal government will be to get Canadians back to work. Liberals believe that the cost of unemployment and lost potential can no longer be tolerated. And we are not the only ones who share this vision. The International Monetary Fund is just one other institution that shares our view. Addressing finance ministers and central bankers at meetings for the IMF and World Bank last week, their managing director said that an all-out attack on the deficit should wait until our economic recovery gains strength. It's clear that Jean Chrétien's plan to reduce the deficit from 5.7% of gross domestic product to 3% of GDP is the type of plan that the IMF views as reasonable. And I'd like to also mention that the last time that Jean Chrétien was finance minister, the ratio went from 5% to 4%. We have a coherent and imaginative plan that balances fiscal restraint with policies for the 1990s. We will establish an infrastructure program to put architects, engineers, electricians, steam fitters, and laborers back to work, repairing the roads, bridges, and water systems of this country. We will establish a Canadian apprenticeship program to provide training in growing economic sectors, including robotics and space sciences. For young Canadians who are finished school but unable to find work, we will establish a Canadian Youth Service Fund. This will enable 10,000 young people a year to participate in important environmental and community programs across Canada and gain valuable work experience and skills. We need a new government for Canada. A government with the policies and programs to lead us into the 21st century. A government that will restore jobs, restore our economy, and restore Canadian pride. Jean Chrétien and the Liberal Party represent new hope and new vision for millions of Canadians. That is our tradition, and that is our goal.
Thank you very much, Karen. Ladies and gentlemen, there is coffee back there, and we're now going to be inviting questions from the audience to the candidates. And if you'd like to pause for a moment, grab anyone that has a question. This gentleman over here.
I'd like to address a question to the Liberal and the Conservative candidates particularly. We arrived in Canada in 1967, and since then, under Trudeau, coming all the way down to Mulroney, we've heard nothing but platitudes with regard to we shall engender work programs, we shall engender reductions in the deficit. None of these things have happened. The Hearts magazine of New York categorically stated the Canadian economy runs on the, like a pimple on the back of an elephant.
What's your question?
Until that happens. So what on earth and how can you honestly say that you can engender work programs, you can engender a reduction in the deficit when none of these things have ever happened?
What's the question? We're going to give you the first opportunity to respond.
I'm going to try to pick the question out of there. First of all, the Conservatives are not advocating any make-work programs. We are saying that it's only private industry and the entrepreneur that can create jobs. Government just has to provide the environment. As far as the deficit is concerned, I agree that it's a major problem. One of the reasons why I went into politics in 1988, because we were not doing enough to resolve that deficit problem. But remember when the Liberals left office, that they were paying $1.33 out in expenses. For every $1 they were taking in taxes. That meant that 33 cents out of every dollar was going on to the national credit card. And at that time, as Karen Morgan mentioned, the debt was about $206 billion. At the present time, the debt has risen to roughly 467. And if you will examine those numbers, you will see that that increase is due to the compounded interest of that debt. When the Conservatives took over, there was a $17 billion deficit, current accounts deficit. This last year, there was a $7 billion surplus in the current account. If we were not paying the compounded interest on the debt that we have of $40 billion a year, then the Canadian government would have shown a surplus. Also to tell you that over the last 10 years that the Canadian public has paid $360 billion in interest alone. This is why we feel that it is absolutely urgent that we get a sane, sensible plan to get rid of that deficit and pay our bills properly.
Karen, would you like to use the microphone, or do you want to?
Why does Canada always live beyond his means?
Well, I think what we're going to do is deal with that gentleman's question that was asked of Mr. Willoughby
Then
and Karen
before they
Morgan.
have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like this to be a, pardon me, madam, we would like this to be a forum where everyone will have an opportunity to express his or her opinion. It isn't going to end up being a shouting match, and it's not going to end up being hurling insults. So let's establish that forum right now. Okay, let's be decent human beings.
Thank you, Bob. Well, there's two parts to that question, and the first part is the make-work projects. Well, in contrast to what Dr. Wilkie has said, I can state categorically that this is not just another make-work project. This is a project, the rebuilding of Canada's infrastructure is something that Canadians, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and the provinces have been looking for close to 10 years. It's a joint, shared cost program that will not just put ditch diggers back to work, although they will as well. It will put engineers and architects and skilled people who need jobs as well back to work. Now, on the side of deficit reduction, I can't speak for the Trudeau government. I wasn't there. I was in school during those days. However, one of the more useless skills that I learned in business school was how to calculate compound interest. And I can tell you categorically that the debt would be about half what it is now if the Tories had not spent any more money building the debt. I can't say to you that this is an easy problem, that it's going to be resolved in 3 years or 5 years. I don't believe that it can be resolved in 3 years or 5 years. Simplistic solutions are not the answer here. What we need is a concrete, coherent plan to build towards the future, and an integral part of that is getting people back to work. When you have close to 25% of your population either on unemployment insurance or welfare, you have not got a productive economy. You cannot deal with deficit problems. That's the key here, and that's what we must address now.
Mr. Lloyd Mcdonald would also like to respond to the gentleman's question, and your question will be heard after he does that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think I've collected just the headlines of some newspapers just the last 4 or 5 days. This isn't a lifetime collection. This is just a couple of days. Economic outlook dims. That's the Globe and Mail. Study blasts free trade deal. That's the Globe and Mail too. Here's free trade frustrates exporters. Here's the Financial Post. GDP drop shows recovery stalled. Liberals backtrack on NAFTA stand. Well, now they backtracked on their backtracks. Reform, let wealthy buy health care. Somebody has to be accountable for the economic approaches of the last 20 years. When are we going to start holding people accountable for what the heck is happening? We just can't keep going in this direction. Hold your politicians accountable for the general economic approach used. Thank you.
Question.
Well,
Well, speech.
I think we'll allow that
Yeah.
one privilege. He was polite about it. Yes, sir.
My question is for Karen Morgan, and it's in regard to the jobs program that she's advocating of some $6 billion. It also involves Delta municipality. On page 60 of the Liberal Red Book, it outlines where the municipalities are going to be paying $4 billion of this $6 billion work project, which means that property owners in Delta will be asked to pay for $4 billion across Canada of the $6 billion. I would like to understand how she can justify this.
I think that's a great question. And the beginning of the answer is that we have a port development, a container port going in at Roberts Bank, and we are cited each year for problems with the Anasasian Island sewage treatment plant. Those are only 2 projects that are going to need investment over the next number of years. Now, the approach of the Conservative government up till now has been to say, tough luck. Federal government money doesn't go to sewage treatment plants. Road projects are a provincial responsibility. Go away. Our approach is to say, these are investments that we need to make in our country. The business community has responded by saying, these investments will pay off with private sector investment in our country. I think the answer is clear. If the investment has got to be made, then why wait and make it later when our roads, our sewers, our water systems will have broken down completely? Now is the time to do it.
I'm hearing over here. This gentleman over here.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions to Dr. Wilkie.
One question.
One question.
Per person. Thank you.
How can we expect representation by Dr. Wilkie when Kim Campbell asked him at his nomination meeting what party is he running for? And wouldn't that leave you in the shadows of a Tory government?
I think that you should have been at that nomination. I'm sure you would have enjoyed the repartee that was going on at the time. when I introduced Kim for that speech, I introduced her as the first woman Prime Minister of Canada, and that is what initiated the response which you are quoting there. I have worked very closely with Kim Campbell for the last 2 years. She is the political minister for BC, and I was the caucus chairman for BC, and as a result, we worked very closely. And I think that she's going to make an excellent Prime Minister. She is making an excellent Prime Minister. I work closely with her. We have confidence in each other, and I would be delighted to represent Delta and work with her for the future of Canada.
Yeah, I have a question for John Waller and the National Party, how they're going to bring that integrity and accountability.
I want to hear this.
You do? How are we going to bring back integrity into Parliament? Well, one of the ways we'll do it is to stop the big business people lobbying and charging those as business expenses. The lobby groups are very, very powerful to the point where their leader says, oh, we don't lobby the members of Parliament. They don't have control. The only place that we go is to the Prime Minister's office. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not democratic. And that certainly isn't the way it should be. We have to bring the power of making legislation back onto the floor of the House of Commons where it belongs and into the hands of our elected representatives, not into the hands of big business who can spend enormous amounts of money to get their view brought forward. The second point is, of course, that the National Party of Canada does not accept donations from big business, big unions, or from special interest groups. So that on the day that the National Party member is elected, the only person he is beholden to is the voter of his riding. Again, not beholden to big business or big unions or special interest groups. Does that answer your question? Thank you. And I would suggest to the gentleman down here that if he'd like to see an alternative program for job creation, that he does leave the building with a copy of this tonight. Thank you.
We have three people, and I'm going to let the ladies come first, yourself. And remind me in case I forget. Madam, or ma'am?
Yes, I would like Dr. Waller to detail what his party's policies are to give a boost to Canadian-owned small business.
Back again. Thank you very much for the question. The strategy is actually 7 pages long, and I have offered it to everyone, but let me very briefly point out let me go to the summary of this statement. A key element of the National Party's full employment strategy is to increase the development of the real job creators, the Canadian-owned small and medium-sized business. Government will address the problems of lack of capital and lack of structural support for research and development, which are impeding development of Canadian-owned businesses. I'd like to tell you a personal story on that point. I was research director for a wholly owned Canadian subsidiary of an American company. I was fighting to get money from my budget as a small percentage of the sales. A large portion of the profits that came from that company were being shipped south of the border untaxed. That made me rather upset. What we would like to do is to change the legislation to the point where Canadian banks have to invest a larger proportion of the money that they get, your savings, my savings, RRSP to invest without paying tax on it. That money must be employed in the Canadian economy for the sake of Canadians. It must not be allowed to go to places like Canary Wharfs. It must not be allowed to go out of the country so that that money can then come back in, buying Canadian bonds and being lost to the economy of this country. Does that answer the question? Thank you.
This gentleman here now. Gentleman over here, and I want to be fair, I realize that some of you are here to ask your own candidates questions. I'm dumb but not stupid. But I do want to be fair, and I would like the fact that we do have an opportunity to ask all of the candidates some questions. I know we can't really set it up that way, but it would be nice if it would work out that way. Your question, did I miss someone here? Because I noticed there was a little bit of a conversation like I had. Did I miss this gentleman? Well, I'll tell you. This gentleman, and then you. Okay.
My question is to Mr. Cummings, and I'd like an honest answer to this. You've expressed, Preston Manley expressed his plan to have a two-tiered health system, a health system for the people that have and the people that have not. Well, I'm going to be a student at university next year, and I'm going to be living by myself. What does that mean? What kind of health care am I not going to get? If somebody else is going to get that.
If you were another candidate, I would suggest that perhaps you've been reading press accounts of what we had to say on health care rather than reading our policy on it. Our policy very clearly states, and I'd be happy to give you a copy of the document that shows that, but it very clearly states that we would maintain funding for health care at current levels. It also very clearly states that in the Constitution, it is the primary responsibility of the provinces to deliver that health care. And we suggest that the provinces who are delivering that service, who are closest to the, for them, and how they deliver that service would be their problem. But what the federal government should do is work to maintain a national standards. And that's the essence of the program. It is not a two-tiered health system. And the other thing that I think that we all have to understand is that we do not, in fact, have one healthcare system in this country. In some portions of the country, dentistry is covered. In other portions of the country, certain surgeries are covered. It's not in this part of the world. In other portions of the country, you can get this service, you can get that service. But it is not a standard program as it is. And so all that we're saying is that we should maintain federal standards. That should be the responsibility of the federal government. The delivery of the service and how they do that is responsibility, constitutional responsibility of the provinces, and they should do that.
Gentlemen, here is a question. You're next, and this gentleman over here is next. I'm trying to do my best.
Question, Mr. Wilby. What impact does free trade have on our economy and our export, and what can we expect from NAFTA?
We did suggest one question, so would you pick one of those two that you want to
Free
ask?
trade. Yeah.
Free trade.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a question that, of course, was a major feature of the last election. And I do have a little bar graph here that does show Canadian exports to the United States. And it's because it's so far away. In 1988, we exported to the U.S. $1.26 billion. 1990, it was the free trade agreement came into effect in January the 1st, 1989. In 1990, we exported $110 billion to the U.S. And in 1992, we exported $122 billion to the U.S. and it is still going up this year. So it shows that the free trade agreement is working. Everybody's agreed that there would be some fallout, some repercussions, there would be some rationalization of industry, but Canadian prices have dropped considerably as a result of the free trade. We have more selections in our stores and our shops because of free trade, and particularly here in British Columbia. Without that free trade dispute settlement agreement, we would be in a far worse condition than we are at the present time, because all of those disputes, such as the softwood lumber, would have to be treated under GATT, which takes much longer and is much poorly defined than the free trade agreement. We have won the disputes over pork, magnesium, many other disputes. Of the 18 or so disputes, Canada has won 12. And so that shows that the dispute mechanism, although it does have flaws, is working. And so I think that it is coming out as expected. There have been some ups and downs, but I think that on the whole, that Canada is winning in the free trade agreement.
Mr. Mcdonald would also like to respond to that. We are allowing the candidates, if they want to respond to certain questions. Well, we have some time now, but anyways, Karen, you'll forgive me for that.
Our Conservative Party. I as well have some bar graphs. I agree with the point that Dr. Welby's making, that indeed trade, particularly goods trade with the United States, has increased significantly over the last 10 years. That's an important point. But the other part of the message is one which we're going to see in the news again tomorrow, that government revenues have declined yet again, and the deficit is going to increase yet again. With all of this trade, why isn't more of it sticking to us? During this last 10 years, business bankruptcies have continued at greater than 10,000 bankruptcies a year. If trade is so good for us, why in the heck aren't we benefiting? During this same last 10 years, incomes have been flat. If trade is so good for us, why aren't we benefiting? During this same last 10 years, unemployment has increased tremendously. If we are benefiting, why in the heck aren't we getting more jobs? And similarly, if trade is so good for us, where the heck are the revenues to government? If there was benefit to us, we would not have the government deficits that we have. It's right, trade is increasing, but we're selling our assets and resources for nothing just to keep the cash register ringing. It doesn't make sense.
This definitely appears to be a very popular topic, so Mr. Cummins would like to respond. I understand that Karen Morgan would like to respond. If all the candidates want to respond, we might as well let them.
With regard to free trade, we have lost in this country, we have lost jobs to free trade. The interesting aspect of that statement is this, that we have in fact gained jobs from free trade in the higher wage levels, in jobs which require greater skills. There has been an increase in jobs. The jobs we've lost have been in the lower technology jobs. The difficulty is that we have not, in this country, there was no training programs put in place to help workers adapt to the demands of free trade. And those demands quite simply would be that we must operate at a higher technological level if we're to compete. There was no provisions made in this country to deal with that issue. The other difficulty with free trade is that Canadian business has suffered from higher taxation, and it is suffering from the restrictive provincial barriers in the country itself, in Canada itself. No provision was made to remove interprovincial trade barriers, and no provision was made to assist business to adjust to a free trade climate. That's the difficulty with the free trade agreement, and that difficulty will only compound itself when we get into NAFTA, unless we take steps to address those shortfalls quickly.
Karen Morgan, the Liberal Party.
We have lost jobs. And John Waller, I knew this before you said it. 350,000 jobs we've lost since free trade was rammed down our throat by Brian Mulroney. Yet another one of his delightful policies that was rammed down our throat. We have had no reduction in the number of disputes. Again? We've had no reduction in the, I won't hate you, Stan. We've had no reduction in the number of disputes. We need a fair trade regime in lumber, steel, pork, and softwood. Now, free trade should be in the best interest of Canadians, not Americans. And Mr. Chrétien has suggested that certain parts of NAFTA need to be renegotiated. And interestingly enough, yesterday in the Globe and Mail, one of the chief negotiators of the original free trade agreement said, as I interpret Chrétien's position, he would hold them to their FTA commitment to implement a new fair trade regime for our exporters of steel, lumber, hogs, and other products to the U.S. Until this reform is achieved, it may not be in Canada's interest to proceed with NAFTA. We definitely need a subsidies dispute resolution mechanisms, and the same energy protection as Mexico.
Yes, you know, one of the things that we have in Canada is a small population. And it's very evident to all of us that unless we have competitive trade, we're going to have a problem here. We have lost jobs to free trade, but we are a trading nation, and we cannot get away from that. Our dynamic is to be competitive. And I believe that the average Canadian business person can rise to that challenge. The problem that we have in Canada is that the federal government has increased and escalated the national deficit. What happens is when you have a large debt in a nation is that you actually dissuade investors from coming to this nation because they believe that Canada is unstable. So what we desperately need to do is to get back their confidence. We need to reduce this deficit. We need to give tax incentives to the business to create more business. We need to bring back business to Canada again so that we can be competitive, that we can get involved in this free trade business, that we can have free trade, and that we can benefit from it. Thank you.
And Benny, I understand that you would like to respond as well. Ladies and gentlemen, when Benny is completed, did you not have a time? Okay, well, I won't. I apologize for that. You know me, I'm very, very honest. Benny will speak, you will speak, we'll break for coffee, and then we're going to try to find out if we can get a sequence of people that want to ask questions of other candidates on other topics that they feel are important. I think we've covered some of them right now, so we're being like a rubber tire here and maybe repeating ourselves. So let's get as much in as we can. Benny?
And let's talk a little bit about common sense and reality, ladies and gentlemen. 4 or 5 years ago, we had an election. The Liberals said no free trade, and the Conservatives said free trade. So the people of Canada made up their mind, trade. Now that we have free trade, we have to live with it. And we, as Canada, little 27 million people, if you think we can exist by trading by ourselves and still have medical programs, hospitals paid for, education, we're sadly mistaken. We can't even trade in between our provinces without all this bureaucracy and red tape. So I say to you, why isn't free trade really working for the benefit of Canada and its people? Well, the negotiators we sent to negotiate a free trade agreement on behalf of Canada and its people did a poor job, a real poor job. They didn't look out for the benefit of Canada, its business, and its people. So I say, let's go back. Let's go back and negotiate an agreement that is suitable for Canada and its people. We should not have to tolerate tariffs all of a sudden on our soft lumber, steel tariffs all of a sudden. I mean, if we tried that in the United States, they'd probably send the troops after us. So I say to you people, the big countries of the world are forming massive economic trading blocks. If we think we can shut the door, it's like you going home and saying, I'm not coming out of my house. How long do you think before you'll starve, ladies and gentlemen? That's reality.
Well done, Benny. Ladies and gentlemen, there are some vacant chairs, and we invite you to use them. There's 5 or 6 here. So come on up and by all means get seated and remain comfortable. And those of you outside who'd like to come in and take a seat. Is it more fun out in the hallway?
What's going on?
I believe somebody took all my cue cards here. I lost another. And that's right. I know I have Mr. Waller of the National Party, and I just wanted to make sure that I got your first name right, John. No, I'm only kidding.
Thank you. I would really have loved to be able to come up here immediately after Lloyd and say, I couldn't have said it better myself.
I know.
The overall effect of the free trade agreement is actually to make this country a resource exporting colony. We're shipping our resources out of this country for the benefit of other people. And because it's set up that way, it prevents any chance of Canada developing a national industrial policy. This country is being deindustrialized at a rate that is absolutely incredible to the people in Europe. They wouldn't stand for it. Why do we? I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. I really don't. On the question of our natural resources, one of the most threatening conditions are the mandatory proportional sharing provisions. What this says is that if we've been selling our natural resources, our gas, our oil, to the United States at a given level, they can demand that we continue to provide those resources at that level, in spite of the fact that there may well be a shortage of those things. We do not have the choice to put the price up and to say to the Americans, hey, these are our resources, we'll trade with you, that's no problem. But we want to have control over our own resources. And you know that when it comes to NAFTA, the Mexicans were smart enough to get an exemption from those proportional sharing clauses. We were dumb enough not to. Thank you.
Would everyone like to just take a couple of minutes for a cup of coffee right now? A break? Does everyone want to? Well, it looks like we're divided. All right. Just briefly, we're going to have a glass of water or a cup of coffee, and then we're going to start. This gentleman over here with a question. And my neighbor, what's your question, candidate?
Thank you. I'd like to make a couple of quick observations. And the first one is, after watching the debates of the last two meetings on television, this is a refreshing change. Very well, and I must say that the candidates are all behaving like gentlemen and ladies, as we would wish them to. And so I'm delighted about that. The next thing is that I'd like to go back to the question this gentleman asked Karen about the business of the infrastructure, how we're going to pay for that. She mentioned something about Roberts Bank and the development there. I happen to know that that is a federal project, and there is no charge to Delta or any municipal participation or even any federal government participation. So that particular project does not qualify as one of the infrastructure projects that would fit into the program that she's mentioned. So I just make that point. The other thing is that I don't think she ever really told us where we're going to get the money to pay for this infrastructure program. And that bothers me a lot because that's going to cost a lot of money. I gather it's going to be shared between the municipal and the provincial and the federal government. And when we ask the question, when Mr. Creighton answers that question, he says, well, we're going to negotiate.
Your question is you'd like to know where the funds are coming from,
where is the money coming
and
from?
what the breakdown of those funds will be from the municipal, provincial, and federal level.
And why would the municipal and federal and provincial governments be amenable to such an arrangement, given the financial condition that they're in, particularly when we can't even arrange free trade between provinces by negotiation? So I think it's a lot easier to say it's going to be negotiated than it is to negotiate. I like to know where the money's coming from.
Okay, good question. And Karen, I'm glad you're answering that.
Just wait for the municipal election, Bob. Okay. The first thing I think we need to talk about is why provinces and municipalities would agree to this. Well, my only answer to that is that they've been asking for this, according to the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, for the last 10 years. They recognize that infrastructure programs need to be undertaken. They have indicated their support for them. They seem to have some idea of where their funds are going to come from. There is only one taxpayer after all. But the federal government, a liberal government, has identified these cuts immediately. First of all, we'll cut your helicopters, Lloyd. We'll cut $325 million in additional defense spending, $400 million from the government's $4.1 billion professional services budget, $225 million in grants to businesses, and $10 million in reductions in the sizes of ministers' staffs and the Prime Minister's office. Now, the infrastructure program, it's talked about as a $6 billion program, and that's quite true. It will be a $6 billion program. The total cost of rebuilding the infrastructure in this country has been estimated at $20 billion at this point in time. A $6 billion is getting a third of the job done. The commitment on the part of a liberal government would be $1 billion in each of 2 years to be matched by provinces and municipalities. That, I believe, is the answer to your question.
Bit of a sleight of hand.
Ladies and gentlemen, we did say we were going to be nice. And, no, that's true, and we are being reasonably nice. I know that a number of the candidates here would like to respond further to that, but I think that we can go on all evening and beat that one to death and not really get on with other issues that people want to discuss. This gentleman over here had a question, and I believe this gentleman here, and there was a lady that had her hand up earlier right there, so we're going to deal with that first, sir.
My question, Mr. Chairman, is not for a maverick behind closed doors, a reform party candidate. It has to do with last night's debate, what President Manning had to say, and quoted verbatim in the Globe and Mail. And let me quote, "The people of each province should direct their provincial government as to how they should raise money to cover their health costs." Mr. Cummins, yes, we need to better manage the delivery of our Medicare, but surely there are other areas to cut. So why does the Reform Party want to savage the National Health Plan?
So your question is pertaining to the National Health
Why
Plan.
does the Reform Party want to savage the National Health Plan and no socks?
The Reform Party states very, very clearly that we will not cut federal transfers to provinces with regard to health care. What we have said is that it is a provincial responsibility to deliver that service. How the provinces attempt to deliver that service is their business. Interestingly enough, there currently are two user fees, Quebec and I believe it's New Brunswick. Now, if that's the wish of the people in those provinces, that that's the way they want their health care delivered, so be it. If it's not, then I imagine that they would turf the governments. But that would be the choice of the provinces, because it is the constitutional responsibility of the provinces. Our commitment is to maintain federal funding, and our commitment is to maintain federal standards.
Karen Morgan has requested to have one brief response, and I'm going to allow just one in this, and then this gentleman, this lady over here. We have three hands up back here. I know the gentleman in the yellow shirt is my neighbor. He has to have it in, or we won't be talking to you. When we walk our dog in the morning, we won't be talking, right?
That our healthcare system is one of our proudest achievements. And it's based on the belief that every Canadian has a right to medical services because he or she is sick, not because he or she has the money to pay for it. It has been under attack over the last 9 years. And if the doctors that I know have talked to me about it, they have said that transfer payments are being cut because of the limitations that have been placed on them. Our national health care system is projected to collapse with the end of transfer payments in the year 2007, approximately. And despite Tory protests, user fees keep surfacing. Now, on the other side of the argument is the Reform Party, which hasn't bothered to hide its agenda. And John, in contrast to what you're saying, I've got some Globe and Mail quotes straight from the mouth of Preston Manning. I think that there's a lot more room for differentiating between people that are able to pay a portion themselves and people that aren't able, which the current Health Care Act does not recognize. Mr. Manning is also in favor of giving Canadians the right to enroll in private health insurance plans. If they're willing to pay, they could get a higher standard of care. Straight from the mouth of Preston Manning. Quicker access is what it's starting to come down to. What I prefer is just to have the federal government cut the strings. Those are words that you must not forget. That means that Preston Manning, at heart, is in favor of Canadians losing their homes after catastrophic illness, or worse, being declared uninsurable. Now we know where the reformers are in the audience. In the United States, that's exactly what is happening. People are losing their homes, and they're being declared uninsurable risks.
The Americans don't even like their system. Why would we want it?
You're misleading people, Cummings.
And since most healthcare services are consumed in the first 2 and the last 2 years of life, this is at heart a sneak attack on seniors. I believe our healthcare system needs to be protected. It's one of the things that makes us distinctively Canadian, and it's a distinctive competence that we bring to the world in our global trading relationships.
Now, I know the other candidates would like to get into the fray on this, but I think we have dealt with it rather adequately. There are people that have given statements as to how they stand on it, and I think that's enough that can be said about it. We pretty well all know where the platforms of the candidates are in that. This gentleman here has a question.
For all 7 candidates, very, very briefly, please. There was a free vote tomorrow in the House. The question on the table was capital punishment. How would each of you vote? In a free vote.
Manning, we'll start with you, and we'll work our way down through. You don't have to come to the microphone.
In black and white, ladies and gentlemen, if there was a free vote on capital punishment, I hope everyone takes one of my common sense realistic platforms home that you all want. It states here, capital punishment for first-degree murder. And I'm sorry for the bleeding hearts out there that says I have to take a life for another life.
Because of the increasing seriousness of crimes in Canada, I think most Canadians are just fed up with the system that we have for paying back the crimes that are committed here. It always seems that the victim is the one that pays, and the criminal is the one that gets handed everything on a silver platter. We don't have the money to keep going on in this way. I think the criminal has to pay a fair. We don't have, as Benny says, bleeding hearts anymore in Canada. We have to call a spade, and we have to call a crime. Now, if somebody premeditatedly sits down, works out a murder, and follows through and cold-bloodedly kills somebody else, then he must or she must pay with their own life. So yes, I'm in favor of capital punishment, and I believe 80% of the Canadian people are also in favor of it. Thank you.
I can see this has turned into speeches. I can only think of the errors in judgment that the criminal justice system has made in the last 5 years, and many of them have come forward, and it scares the heck out of me that we'll be in a position where we'll continue to make mistakes. On that basis alone, I have to say no to taking that.
would vote yes for capital punishment. We're committed to voting the wishes of our constituents on those types of issues.
That's not an answer.
Was the question, how would the candidate vote, or?
You're asking how I would vote, and what you're asking me is how, is a bigger question than just how I would vote on the issue. The question is, how would I vote on capital punishment? That type of an issue, we say, should go to referendum. And what we would call for then would be, we would ask for input in the constituency. We would prefer that a vote be taken in the constituency, and the Reform MP would be committed to voting the way his constituents wish. That being said, contrary to the way the referendum was run in this country, the candidate or your MP should, in our view, commit themselves to a position on that. And they should take that position and defend it or promote it during that referendum. The end result is that you must vote the wishes of your constituency. I answered the question asked, Stan. That's different.
How would you vote?
I was asked.
How would you vote?
The question was, how would you vote in the House of Commons in a free vote? In a free vote, I would vote as my constituents directed me on that issue.
Wouldn't have time for a referendum and a free vote.
No, that's true.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think Mr. Cummins has answered the question as it was asked. He said that he would abide by the wishes of his constituents. I think that's democracy. How would you respond?
He does not mislead the people, Canadian people. Give the straight answer, I will. Yes.
I gave it.
You mislead 2 times.
I gave it.
None.
No.
I answered the question asked.
Next speaker.
I would like to hear from Karen Morgan now. We're not going to get our voters involved in personal shoving attacks, sir. I respect your opinion, but you have to respect that there's 99 other people here who would like to be heard as well.
I have to say that Lloyd has probably said it all to me. I believe that there are frequently errors made in the justice system. And as long as any possible error can be made, then I would have to.
I'd just like to remind you of the 2 names, Donald Marshall and David Milgard. These people would have been put to death. And I'm a scientist, so I like to look at the evidence. And the evidence says that since capital punishment in Canada was abolished, there's been a reduction in homicides, not an increase. And I look at the Western democracies and say, they don't have capital punishment either. So, in a free vote, which our party advocates, I would vote against capital punishment.
That was a very good question. Then my neighbor.
I would like John Cummins to please explain the Reform Party policy regarding old age pension.
With regard to old age pensions, we are committed to maintaining funding an old age pension, but we are suggesting that old age security should be directed to those people who need it most. In other words, people whose family income is less than the national average, which is $54,000 a year.
That's your question. Now my neighbor. I don't want to identify. Maybe he doesn't want to be known. Go ahead.
Question. My name's John Davies. Question for Mr. Cummings. I think it's realistic to think that the Reform Party is not going to have any chance of being more than sprinkling of representatives in Ottawa. Now, without any prejudice to him, I just want to ask him how he thinks and why he thinks we should vote for him, and how he thinks he could have any effect whatsoever on the deficit, health care plans, unemployment, or anything else if he were voted for Ottawa.
In other words, you want to know how he can have an effect, but we don't want to get into all four of those programs. Maybe John will be good enough to generalize it.
In the first instance, I'd disagree with your assessment. I think that you'll find that there'll be more than a sprinkling of reformers in the next Parliament. The second issue is how can a minority party have an effect in the House of Commons? And we have a very simple answer to that, and that is that we suggest that all votes in the House of Commons should be free votes. What that means then is that the candidate or an MP should vote the wishes of his constituents on issues in the House of Commons. Now,
I'm sorry, that's not answering my question.
you asked me if I could clarify your question.
How do you think you can have any effect? The chances of getting a free vote are very small unless you guys get a majority. Now, you're not going to get a majority. Now, tell me how you're going to have any effect on those policies without that.
Well, without that, what you're going to end up with in this country is probably a parliament that's not going to work. If the next parliament, a minority parliament, is to work, the simplest way to make it work is to call for free votes in the House of Commons. All it takes to enact that is for the Prime Minister to turn to the Speaker and declare that that's the same, and that the government would only be defeated by a vote of non-confidence. That is not an outlandish suggestion. That's the way it works in Great Britain. Margaret Thatcher was non-confidence, was called in her government. Tory members simply went back on side and supported her. That's how a minority parliament could work, and work very well in this country, and that's how members from smaller parties would be very effective in the House of Commons. They could carry your message to the House of Commons very, very effectively in that type of a scenario.
This side of the room's had their hand up. There's a gentleman over here who's had his hand up as well. Mr. Bill Dennis. And then I haven't forgotten you folks back there.
Quite sure this has been a very edifying and interesting debate here tonight, and done very civilized in a Canadian way. The discussion of national issues is very important. But many of us here are concerned about a local issue, and that is the future of Boundary Bay. 25 years off and on we've been fighting over the future of Boundary Bay, and it still lies there unprotected. It has never been nailed down for all time. And it's one of the great refueling stops, pit stops, for the birds going north and south. What, if you are elected as an MP, are you going to say in the House of Commons what should be done to protect the bay for all time?
Good question. Lloyd, you asked me first, so.
I'm not sure if you did ask me, but let me respond first. Let me take the initiative. That's what I want to do. Take the initiative. This is one of the areas where there is three levels of government having responsibility. Each of these three levels of government in the past has said, well, it's not really all mine, so we'll let them worry about it. It's really not all mine, we'll let them worry about it. It's time to form an action group of politicians, not a study group, but an action group of politicians, where they decide what action should be taken regarding that specific issue. Each one goes back to its own level of government to say, this is what I'm going to do, which fits into that overall plan. That's the only way this is going to work. It is also time for people of Delta to be overly conservative in dealing with the environmental issues. It's time to go beyond what we've been thinking about, and if necessary, then we move back from that. But not to start from a little core center and slowly work out, because by the time we get to the outside will be gone. And in that regard, I think each one of us is becoming more of an environmentalist. And I know I sure as heck am, and I want to work with you to bring the three levels of government together to provide action, not only on Boundary Bay, but on Burns Bog as well.
This is a question of all of the candidates, so they'll all respond to this.
Well, I want to take a little bit of the initiative too. Lloyd, you can't take it all. But however, when I first came to Canada, I mean, I was just like the average Joe. I didn't really concern myself about anything else other than myself. But I think as we get older, we tend to realize that our kids are going to have to take over from us. And what we leave, our kids are going to have to manage with. I think one of the things that really stood out to me recently was Cockpit Sound. you know, you have this large group of people complaining about the trees, and this other group of people complaining that they need jobs. Well, how do you take both issues and work through this? I personally believe that they both have realistic goals. And I think that we have to sit down as a nation, we have to sit down as a municipality and realize that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility because we live here and we have to pass what we leave on to future generations. This boundary bay, if we don't look after it, will be gone for good. Kakwa Sound will be gone for good. I agree with you, sir. I think that we have to take stock of what resources we have in Canada, what we want to retain, because once it's gone, it's gone.
Thank you.
Again, let's talk about reality, ladies and gentlemen. The logo on my campaign signs is the Canadian beaver. The beaver that builds little dams, the beaver that gathers, the beaver that works hard. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I went up to the black hole at Clackwood Sound to defend the animals and the trees and the loggers. I was there. If you want proof of it, read the province newspaper and ask them who the Sasquatch was wandering around. 3.5 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, at City Council here, who was up there screaming, no, 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 resign, resign, to stop Boundary Shores Golf Course, so we wouldn't upset the balance of nature. We wouldn't be devastating some of those birds that create the balance of nature, so we don't have too many bugs and too many other things that harm human beings. Yes, I was there. That went all across Canada. And who since 1987, running for mayor, has said no development, more development on the bog? I'm not an environmentalist, ladies and gentlemen, but my wife tells me, sure, otherwise us humans will not be able to live. Thank you.
I think I noticed you got your plug in from there, but we'll let that go.
Just going to ask if anybody knows about beaver fever. That the gentleman had asked this question, of course, is a pioneer family from this area, and he's seen tremendous changes that have occurred in Boundary Bay. When he and I were younger, you could go and pick up oysters around there and have a great time, and great flocks of brant and geese and whatever. And these are changing radically. But I think also that people's opinions and attitudes change, and I think that more and more there is a consensus developing. Lloyd talked about the 3 levels of government, and I think that you will see that this 3 levels of government will come together, that there is a plan developing for Boundary Bay. It is only through input by groups such as this that that plan will be progressed. And there are various options that need to be examined and looked at. I am all in favor of keeping Boundary Bay the way it is, improving it if possible. Again, Bill would remember the old Mulvey Sweet plan where they were going to dredge Boundary Bay and make big humps of sand and build little satellites all through Boundary Bay. And when we think of it today, we shudder. But I hope the decisions that we do make at all levels of government and all parties will not be the type of thing that could have developed there, but there will be to protect the environment for the future.
Yes, I would support the preservation of Boundary Bay, and I would hope that all 3 levels of government would be able to work to achieve that. The difficulty that it seems to me that we have in preserving some of these areas is the question of private property, and how do we deal with private property in areas which are ecologically sensitive. And I think that that's an issue that we as Canadians have to address. How do we evaluate and put a value on that land? And then if we want it badly enough, then I think that the onus should be on us to make the effort and pay for it. But I think it's an issue that has to be addressed when we start looking at these areas like that, is the whole question of property rights.
Karen?
There have been a lot of platitudes and lots of rhetoric about Boundary Bay and about protecting other areas within British Columbia. One of the important things that we have to recognize is that generally Boundary Bay is thought to come under an all-party bill which was passed in the House of Commons, which says that working cooperatively with provincial and territorial governments, we will protect in its natural state a representative sample of each of the country's natural regions, amounting to at least 12% of Canada. That's great, and I applaud that goal, but at this moment, Boundary Bay doesn't fit into it because it's not unaltered landscape. And anyone from the Canadian Wildlife Service will tell you that quite happily. We've got some serious problems in trying to save Boundary Bay. Not the least of those is private property. The other part of it is what is a park, how other countries define parks, and I've discovered some interesting examples. For example, Brecon Beacons in Wales, where they define a park as the interaction between man and nature. Now in Great Britain, of course, space is limited. There is virtually no unaltered landscape. And I think therein lies a model for us in that narrow band of land at the bottom of Canada that we inhabit and which we have altered. We must find ways to preserve Boundary Bay. I think that in the long term it requires nothing less than a redefinition of what is a park. The other thing the Canadian Wildlife Service will tell you quite happily and immediately is that there is no money for acquisition. In fact, the Canadian Wildlife Service has been backing away from the operating costs that they have because they've been cut by successive governments, not only on capital acquisition, but also operating costs. In order to deal with some of those problems, we need to look at other parts of our law. We need to look at things like our income tax law, so that we can allow people to make donations of development rights or outright donations of land. That is one of the things that I would like to see happen in order to make that possible. That does require cooperation with the provincial and municipal levels of government, but I don't think Lloyd, being a New Democrat, has a monopoly on cooperation with those other levels of government. And I think that it is possible if we take some creative approaches to saving those lands and doing our research so that we know exactly what we're talking about when we get into these issues.
There are some very distinct disadvantages in being last and fourth. Of course, Boundary Bay must be protected. And of course, there are many ways of doing it. But I'd like to tell you that the National Party of Canada is the only party in this upcoming election who is committed to providing adequate funding to assist citizens groups to participate in environmental hearings and to contribute to environmental policy making, so that we don't have to hang around for another 20 years and let the bay deteriorate and deteriorate while we try and get the government to listen to the people and to hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Both you people have been patient. Would you let the lady go first, or would you rather?
No.
Madam, your question?
I would like to ask a question of Dr. Wilby. Dr. Wilby, can you tell me if your government is planning to continue allowing low-level flying over Labrador? I am concerned about our Canadian citizens in the north.
I have not heard any discussion on this matter in the last year or so, and I couldn't really say what is going on in the minds of our people defense department, so I can't give you an honest answer right now.
Excuse me, but as our member, could you not become acquainted with that issue?
I would be quite happy to check if you wish to. We just phone my office and I'll phone Ottawa for you and see if there's any current. 946-5858.
The gentleman back here has been patient, and I know there's a gentleman over here that's patient, and I haven't forgotten you, and I haven't forgotten the lady here. Go ahead, sir.
I have a question for Mr. Cummins, and I invite Stan Wilby and Terry Morgan to respond as well. Mr. Cummins, the formers say that the Tory 5-year plan to cut the deficit is too slow. It's going to ruin the country. The Tories say that your 3-year plan is going to decimate the country. Now, there's only a difference of 2 years there, and a $30 billion something debt, so it's a very small difference. But obviously, cutting stuff like bilingualism and pensions of MPs isn't enough. Where else are you going to get that money from?
Well, our plan to eliminate the deficit in 3 years, we start off by suggesting that we're going to reduce the cost of government and start off by reducing such things as MPs' pensions to begin with. But we also say that we're going to reduce the size of government, the number of government functions, and we would hope there that we'd be able to save in that $5.7 billion in that area. Now, I'm just going to very quickly outline them. I'd be happy to give you a more detailed paper for it afterwards. We also suggest we could reduce subsidies to the business and special interest groups and save $4.3 billion, restructuring social programs $9 billion, for a total savings in the third year of $19 billion. Now, when we say that, we're also stating very, very clearly that we intend to maintain payments in support of health care and advanced education. And I think that I want to underline that. The rest of the shortfall, we believe, could be made from an improved business climate. The business can see a light at the end of the tunnel as far as taxes go. They can see that the end of the deficit is near. We expect that they would be more encouraged to make investment and so on, and that would realize the growth in the economy would realize the balance. Thank you.
Dr. Wilby?
I think both of our plans are based on the fact that we expect the economy to grow by roughly 3 or 3.5%. Now, the way the present budget was set up, there was a financial paper released in December of this last year, of 92. Also, the budget of 1992 and the budget of 1993, spending cuts were outlined there that would bring the deficit down to $8 billion by 1997-98. This will be a stepwise reduction through many different cuts in spending over a wide area of events. Now, this leaves a deficit still in 1998 of $8 billion. And so what they are proposing to do, in addition to the cuts already that have been announced, is that we would cut the subsidies to business by $750 million. There will be a cut in the freezing of our Department of National Defense budget, which will contribute to that. There will be a further cut in government spending across the board of roughly 5%, and this should bring the reduction down to zero in 5 years.
So why will your 5-year plan work, but a 3-year plan is only 2 years shorter, decimate the country? I'm having a hard time understanding that. 2 years in the whole scheme of the life of Canada doesn't seem like that long. But you're saying a 5-year plan is responsible, and a 3-year plan is going to kill us. Now, I do agree that a 3-year plan will kill us, but I don't understand the difference between a 3-year and 5-year plan.
We're saying that it will give the economy, it will give the country a chance to adjust. We could have cut everything right out 2 years ago when Mazikowski took over as finance minister, but they chose rather to give various government departments and agencies the opportunity to adjust, to make allowances in their budgets. You cannot just take a large percentage of the government workforce and fire them because they're going to be on unemployment insurance. And this is where we disagree with the reform people. We also say that the UI, we say that instead of just taking them out of UI and putting them onto welfare, that you give them a chance to be retrained. And I should point out that we have included $3.8 billion for a retraining program.
9 years long enough to cut the debt? John Penning's going to help.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, remember what the promise was made at the beginning of the meeting. Let's not get carried away. Now, there was a gentleman over here.
I also asked that Karen Morgan respond as well, if that's okay. If it's not,
Well, I would think that if you had made that arrangement earlier, we would allow that to be done. You all want to respond. Well, I would like to also, I mean, we've dealt with the debt, we've dealt with a lot of issues. And I'm not trying to stifle debate here, but I am trying to get as many people involved in this debate as possible. And if we allow it to sort of, keep at one particular issue constantly, we're not going to get on to other people.
Well, this is an important issue, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I would hope that you think that everything that's discussed this evening are important. You had your hand up and you've been waiting patiently. Your question, sir.
Dr. Wilby, at the outset of the meeting in your remarks, you talked about being behind the closed doors at 24 Sussex Drive with the Prime Minister, Mr. Mulroney, with all that expensive furniture. You wanted to sell city taxpayers. And you were talking things like Beach Lake and the Charlottetown Accord. Now, at all candidates meeting last week, you said that if re-elected, you would reintroduce that private members bill to abolish the Senate. Now, with this in mind, let me ask you, do you want to abolish the Senate, which your mentor, Brian Mulroney, staffed in order to pass the GST? And do you not know that it takes a constitutional amendment of 7 provinces, 50% of the vote, and some people say all 10 provinces, to have that passed? So it was not simply political grandstanding and old-style politics to say that last week.
There are many reasons for introducing private members' bills. One of them is to bring forth subjects for discussion and debate. And one of the reasons for presenting the abolishment of the Senate originally was to bring it forward. But with the advent of Beach Lake and the Charlottetown Accord, it became rather obsolete because people had discussed it thoroughly at that time. I think at the present time that we could isolate this matter of Senate reform. Now, there are some countries who have abolished their second house, but later on reintroduced a new form that was compatible with what they felt was best for their country at that particular time. I think all of us agree that the Senate is obsolete, that it doesn't serve the function for which it was designed. Originally, the intent was very good. You get a bunch of significant, distinguished Canadians who would gather around and discuss legislation and make improvements and so on. That was the original intent. But what it is degenerated into is strictly patronage, and there are some very fine Canadians who serve in the Senate, by the way, who are not strictly patronage appointments. But it's not a modern device that serves Canada well. Abolish it, and then, if necessary, reintroduce a new type of second house. Or perhaps this would provide the incentive to discuss, and perhaps we could reform it. The big problem is you and I and every Canadian, British Columbian recognizes that the Maritimes and Central Canada want to maintain their power. And this is where the difficulty comes in changing that constitution and altering the Senate at the present time.
There's a lady here that had her hand up. Thank you, Dr. Wilby. I know that you've had your hand up, sir. I'm trying to be fair to both sides of the room, and I know you're going to hate me for it, but anyway.
No, I don't hate you.
Dr. Wilby, what is the national deficit for this year?
Question? She asked what was the national deficit for this year. The fiscal year goes from March till March. We're in October at the present time. My understanding is that we are $2 or $3 billion below in revenue to expectations, and so that if things continue as they are, then it could be a shortfall, and the deficit could be larger. But Kim Campbell has made it very clear that she is prepared to take whatever measures are necessary to keep that deficit down, cut government spending in areas whichever we can find that would be the least damaging to the economy, and but we do have to control that deficit.
Were you asking for a dollar amount, man?
Lots.
20 million. Well, I don't think anybody knows that.
There was a shortfall of 2 million as of now.
2 billion or 2 million? It was 2 million, we all agree.
20 million after 2 quarters.
You need to recognize that revenue for a government, such as any business, is not steady every month of the year, that it does up and down. There's very many variable things, and so you have to take it for a total year. You cannot just take a few months out of it, because some months you have a gross excess.
I thought figures were published a little earlier.
You thought the figures were usually going to be published a little earlier?
Is it the forecast how much?
They will have periodic, or they will announce periodically just what the financial situation is in the country. These are put out by Stats Canada and Department of Finance.
Wasn't the question raised at the debate last night? Yes.
Madam,
Question raised at the debate last night, the figures used in the forecast as to what the deficit was needed
As I say, they announce them periodically during the year, and I don't know just exactly when the dates are, but they will be announced regularly.
there were a lot of things mentioned today last night. Go ahead, sir, and I haven't forgotten you.
Staying with that subject, Kim Campbell said that she couldn't open the books for 2 months. They didn't know what the figures were. They couldn't open them for 2 months. After running the country for 9 years, what are we waiting for? But staying on that, Kim Campbell has also said that elections are no time to talk about serious issues, like Medicare. She's
Well, your
also
question
said,
is, okay.
okay, I'm getting to it, and she also says that she doesn't see the jobless rate in this country dipping below 10% until at least the year 2000. Dr. Wilby, where's the vision? Are they so preoccupied with getting reelected that they have no plan? They can't open the books for 2 months? We can't talk about issues during an election campaign, and unemployment's going to stay high until the year 2000? Where's the vision? Where's the plan?
I think that the plans are obviously there.
She hasn't articulated them.
I think that she is still in the process of doing that. I think that she is doing what Canadians have demanded, that they, politicians, be honest and not come up with all these that if you do not know something, you will say that. Now, she did not say that the unemployment would remain at 10% till the end of the century.
She said she
that
expected it to
would
remain.
higher.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay.
If he's going to respond, and you're going to be talking, no one here is going to understand. So let him respond, please. Thank you.
She has said that the unemployment rate will be high until the end of the decade. And I think that everybody that looks at unemployment rates will recognize that this is so. There is a serious dislocation in our economy with many different things, worldwide depression and recession, and that there is a rationalization of our economy. It's going to take time. It's going to take time to retrain the people that have lost jobs because of technical changes. And you cannot just bring those people and put them into the new jobs right away. So that I think that this is being realistic, that there is no simple fix. You cannot just borrow a bunch of money as the Liberals would do and dig a bunch of ditches and build roads and borrow money at that and expect to create permanent jobs. So, I think that she is being realistic and indeed does have the plan. Now, as far as her comment on the issues of the day, and again, I think that you have partially misquoted her. And I think that what she really said was that during an election campaign, it's not the time to get involved in the you can talk about basics and philosophy, but to start talking about major changes that involve other levels of government. For example, the health plan. This is an agreement between the federal government and the provinces, and for the feds to go on by themselves and say, we will do this and we will do that, it is very difficult without the agreement of the provinces. And so, again, she's being realistic and doing what the Canadian public has been asking for. tell us as it really is, not as you would like us to believe that it is.
I get the distinct impression that all the candidates want a chance at responding to this question, and would the audience be upset if I were to allow that? I know we have an awful lot of other questions to deal with, but I think it's only right that we do that. So we will start with this end and work our way down across to this end.
In my approach at the beginning, I suggested that the National Party does indeed have a plan to get people back to work. I've offered a copy of this to everybody in the room if they would like it. I didn't expect this many people. We have about 40 copies. If there are more than 40 people who would like to see how the National Party would get people back to work.
Thank you for being here.
The vision for this country, I think, comes from a combination of both short-term and long-term plans. In the short term, you've heard a lot about the infrastructure plan, and it's a reasonable one for laying the foundation for business investment in this country, and the business community has given that reaction to us. In the longer term, we need to develop an industrial strategy for this country. We need to identify those key industries that are going to be important to us in the 21st century, and we need to lay an education plan that will tie into that economic vision. We've already begun those stages by suggesting a national apprenticeship program and by talking about a Canada Youth Service in order to get kids back to work now. What I want to see is an educational system where our children are prepared for the jobs that are going to come up in the 21st century. Jobs in microelectronics, telecommunications, medical technology. Those are the growing industries. Those are the areas where we need to focus our energies.
I think that the question actually says it all, and my response, I think, would be rather brief, in that we recognize that in an election campaign, a 47-day campaign, it is the time to discuss serious issues. And that's one reason why, for example, we introduced discussion on this Medicare, because it is a critical issue today. We're looking at a 12.5% growth in expenses in that area over the last 12 years, and last 10 years, and now is the time to talk about those things. And I'm glad the question was raised. Lloyd.
Well, I'm very pleased the question was asked as well. Canada's New Democrats published their jobs plan last March, and we're very flattered that the Liberals have borrowed liberally from it. But some action that any government can take which will bring about jobs in a hurry. And it's not very complicated. One of the things that has to be established is confidence, consumer confidence, business confidence. And that confidence will come about with the knowledge that the government is not going to turn around and cut back expenditures. If that happens, each one of us is going to hold our money closer and closer, spend less and less. If you think the government has less revenue right now, it will have less revenue tomorrow as I hold my money closer to my chest, and the spiral will go down and will go down. What we need is a government that says, stay with us, we're going to keep this thing going. We're going to have to work harder, and when this thing comes out the other end, when we do get people going back to work, because each of us is spending, and let me tell you, financial institutions won't tell you there's any shortage of money. Financial institutions will tell you there's lots of money. The problem is that each one of us is saving it and not spending it. Our answer to the job solution is to give people, both businesses and consumers, the confidence to move forward.
I think Stan and the Progressive Conservatives have been feeding us smoke and mirrors. I think what we've had for the past 3 decades is physician-administered poison, and now they're trying to tell us that they have the antidote to this poison. They're the ones that have created it. They're the ones that have created the situation. A government that you elect has to have a vision that takes into account all the possibilities and chooses the best road for us. Now you see where we are today, and you tell me, have they chosen the best road for this country? Where are we today? I could have done a better job. I don't have to be an expert to spend people's money. We're in debt, and because of that debt, we are not attracting investment. Because we don't attract investment, because our country is not stable, we don't get jobs. And now they're trying to tell us that they can create jobs. Well, I can prove to investors that Canada is a stable place to invest in. We're not going to have those jobs. So stop using smoke and mirrors, and tell your party to do that too.
This election, ladies and gentlemen, is about issues. Lots of issues. They're all in here, so make sure you take them home. I went to visit my 82-year-old dad yesterday. He was lying in bed. He said, "Son, the cost of doing business in Canada is too high." That's right, in plain English, the cost of business in Canada is too high. So how do we create jobs if it's cheaper to do business elsewhere in the world? We gotta look at the foundation. The foundation is where businesses can come in and they can know that they can make a profit and return a dividend to their shareholder. They know that if they start to set up factories, the rules and taxes won't change in the middle of the factory production. They've got to know that there's a stable workforce out there and the unions don't dictate. They've got to know that they have access to resources and other materials to bring the product to market. And most of all, they have to know that the government isn't in their pocketbook asking for more and more and more taxes. And most of all, they've got to know that they can't succeed, or otherwise they're down to Mexico, they're down to Chile. And Mr. Kretschek can tell us all he wants about job creation. But the government has no money. And if the investors won't invest, where's the jobs coming from, Mr. Kretschek?
Ladies and gentlemen, when we originally called this meeting, we had thought that at 9 o'clock we would ask every one of the candidates to summarize and plead with you to vote for them. And I don't want to be the one that stifles debate, but I think there's been an excellent cross-section of questions this evening. And I believe that Mr. Cox has his hand up, and if he does, I'm going to allow one last question. And then we're going to ask the candidates to take 3 minutes each to summarize. Mr. Cox.
Our efficient chairman did ask to spread the subject. There's one subject that hasn't been touched tonight. Here in Delta, we have a very valuable farming industry, which produces something like $40 million a year in products at the farm gate. I would like to ask principally Mr. Cummings, but any of you, what the party's policy is in relation to agriculture.
Excellent question. I take it you'd like all the candidates to respond to that, Mr. Cummings?
The Reform Party's position on agriculture is that we support an agriculture policy that's based on market mechanisms and meets the needs of producers and consumers. We feel that we should be shifting government-supported agriculture industry to an industry shaped by the free operation of comparative advantage and free entry into all sectors of production and marketing. And we also believe that we should have free trade on a global basis and market in agricultural products. I think one of the difficulties facing agriculture in Canada today is the subsidies that are paid offshore to producers offshore. And that puts us at a distinct disadvantage. We as a country, our economy is in the shape that it's very difficult for us to maintain subsidies to farmers to keep them competitive. Interestingly enough, we have a similar position in the fishing industry now in this province, where 3 or 4 years ago we were getting almost $4 a pound for sockeye salmon. This past year, it dropped to 90 cents a pound. And for the fishermen, there are no insurance plans when that happens. And so I think that if you look at primary industries in this province, in this country, we've got a real problem of inadequate income and rising costs, all which have to be addressed very, very carefully. We do have an agriculture broadsheet which details much more clearly our agriculture position, much more clear than I can do, and I'd be happy to share that with you after the meeting.
No disrespect, John, I believe that Mr. Cox's question though was, as federal candidates, what do you feel has to be done in order to preserve agriculture here in Delta? That's the issue. In other words, we have a farm gate value of $40 million plus per year. Agriculture is under tremendous pressure here in the local community, and I think the answer that you want is more specifically related to Delta. Is that correct, Mr. Cox?
Oh.
Dr. Wilby, well, then you can respond here.
But I would like all of you to keep that brief, because people are getting impatient. I think we've got to get this thing wound up.
These candidates to be brief on a particular item like that. I have worked closely with the Delta farming community in Ottawa in resolving their problems with pesticides, with their problems with cross-border dumping of American products into Canada. We've been able to protect them in that way. And the Conservative government has made it very clear that we are one of the only countries that are fighting under GATT to preserve our marketing system within Canada. And we will continue to fight for our farmers that they will continue to get a fair price for the products which they are producing. We recognize again, as many other problems, that there's 3 levels of government involved here. Local taxes make farming very difficult. The intersection of the farmers by railways, highways, all this type of thing makes farming very difficult. And I think that it is again going to require the cooperation of the farming community as well in finding crops that they can profitably farm in Delta. And this is going to require the cooperation of the federal government, and we're certainly prepared to do that.
I guess in the interest of brevity, I'll say that New Democrats have fought for a heck of a long time in favor of the marketing boards and supply management. And I guess personally, my feeling is, as I've spent most of my life in the Fraser Valley, I'm certainly frightened that we are losing control. We are losing control of our supplies and sources of food. And that is in part through free trade agreements. And the solutions aren't easy to that. We know that we're going to have to live through debt for a long time, but I want to stick with, yes, subsidies if we have to, but control of our food supplies is critical. I'll just leave it there. Karen?
As I understand it, the farmland in Delta is some of the most productive farmland outside of the Niagara Peninsula, which we know is mostly paved over now. I think it's very important that we highlight this area as a strategic area for agriculture production. The kinds of marketing boards and supply side management that have been available are important to us as a Liberal Party. I know that many of the programs that are available to prairie grain farmers are not currently available in Delta, and I believe that that's something that needs to be looked at. They're not available in British Columbia at all. I believe that we also need to take some creative solutions locally. As we all know, the grain industry on the prairies has been devastated over the last few years, primarily due to climatic conditions. And some of the farmers in the area directly around Winnipeg have taken some interesting approaches to solidify their positions. And one of the things that they've done, and I have mentioned this to other people in the riding who have the ability to influence some of these decisions about what crops are grown, is that they've pre-sold cash crops to area residents within Winnipeg at the beginning of the season and delivered them throughout the season to residents of Winnipeg. And in that way, they've developed a relationship with the city that is most directly related to that particular farming community. That is only one example of the kind of creative solution that I think we must be constantly looking for in order to preserve the farming community right here in Delta.
all know that farming plays a very important part in the life of Canada, in the life of our balance of trades, in the life of our exports. I believe that we should have a national self-sufficiency in food. I think we would all like that. But one of the problems is we've become dependent on the government for subsidies. We've become dependent on supply management. I think that what we need to do is to make the farmer more market-oriented and phase out this supply management so that we become more self-reliant and that the farmer becomes more self-reliant and that we can have a strong farming industry.
I seem to be getting a reputation for being brief, so again, I'll maintain that reputation. For any of you who haven't seen A Hope for a New and Better Canada, I'll tell you what the National Party stands for. They identify the farmers as the suppliers of our most basic needs. And the National Party views agriculture as one of Canada's most important industries. We will develop government initiatives to ensure a strong and viable farming community through the following 5 principles. Preservation of the family farm, retention of marketing boards, diversification, national self-sufficiency, and intensified agricultural research and development. Large corporations will not be allowed to dominate agriculture, and accessible, low-interest loans will be made to farmers in need. Thank you.
I am a part-time vegetable farmer and a darn good one. A darn good one. So I know what it's like to take a seed, pop it in the ground, and eat it 3 or 4 months later. Farmers are basically small businessmen, and farmers know what farmers need and what farmers have to do. And governments have to give them initiatives and encouragement so that they can compete in the world food growing agriculture. And we can do our part in British Columbia and Delta by making sure we preserve all the best farmland, so those farmers can grow the best crops on those lands. Because we must never, ever rely on any other country to feed us. If we do, you remember last year when lettuce was $2 a head and you were complaining? Well, that's the reason we didn't have ours, so they could dictate the price to us. Thank you.
If this lady's question is directed at one candidate and it's brief, I'll allow it. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up. Will you promise me that? You won't break your promise?
I won't break.
Okay, then go ahead.
Okay, my question is directed to the Reform Party candidate, Mr. Cummings, and it's in reference to the question that was earlier asked on capital punishment, and based on your response, I just want to reference Edinburgh Member of Parliament for Bristol, who told the electors of Bristol, you elect me to exercise my judgment, not yours. That is democracy. Mr. Cummings, could you please give me your comments on your understanding of this?
I'd be happy to. The quote that you've made is one that's often used. And what we're talking about essentially is the difference between responsible government and representative government. In Canada here, I think that we've pretty well had our fill of so-called responsible government, where we elect a member to Parliament. That member goes off and votes as he or she wishes on issues. The Canadian public, for example, was adamant that it did not want the GST recently, and yet that particular form of taxation was pushed through, even though the majority of people did not want it. Recently, when the vote was held on capital punishment, the majority of Canadians preferred capital punishment, but their members in their own wisdom decided that they would vote for abolition. And so this is really the dilemma here. And my party says that Canadians, no longer distrust or no longer trust their politicians because they've seen them go off to Ottawa, promise one thing here, go off to Ottawa and deliver another. And what we're saying is that we must be held accountable. We've got to turn the corner on this accountability in this country. We're saying that our MPs must be held accountable when they go to Ottawa. And for that reason, I respond the way I did, because we must represent people. That's the party platform. I beg your pardon?
That's why we have elections every 4 or 5 years.
And that's why the Canadian, in the country currently, what we have is we have democracy about once every 5 years. We go through this process. It's sort of like springtime in Baffin Island. It's here for a few days and then it's gone. And that's the last we have of democracy in this country, because once they're there, they can do what they want, or they're doing what the parties tell them, or what their parties tell them to do. We're saying that Canadians have had enough of that. We want representation, and furthermore, if we send somebody to Ottawa and they do not do what the constituents demand, we are suggesting recall. My God, that's what people want. If we're going to restore confidence in the Parliament of this country, we must institute these types of changes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I give in to one more question, we have 1 minute for each candidate to summarize. Now, we did agree on 1 minute, is that correct, Eva? I was misquoted when I said 3. I've been wrong all night, so 1 minute. The lady has said 1 minute, that's what it's going to be. We're going to start with Benny Wolf, and we're going to work our way across the table right down here to John. So 1 minute to summarize on why you should vote for he or she.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be your nonpartisan voice in Parliament. I want to represent all of you equally. I want you to take home this poster. You will realize what I've been talking about for the last 4 years. I want you to take home the issues that you talk about to your family, to your business associates, to your school teachers, in the restaurants. This is what you are demanding from your politicians. And I come with the Canadian Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, 14 issues made up by 12 beavers from all over Canada that people praise, that people say, Benny, we're sold on it. Please ask the rest of the politicians to adopt. In fact, Mr. Wilby took the copy home last week. And last but not all, I have a few copies here of why I voted no on the Charlottetown Accord and came up with the Beaver Lake Accord. This was published in the North Delta now, only in North Delta and Surrey. But it is a dynamite one. I've only got a few copies. So please take home the posters, the Constitution, and the platform, ladies and gentlemen, and I guarantee you, you'll say, go for it, Benny.
And you know, when a member of Parliament takes up the Constitution from 12 beavers, you've got to be worried, haven't you? Well, anyway, what's the conclusion? I believe that the conclusion that we've come to is that we need a government that more honestly reflects the average Canadian. Because tonight we haven't seen that. That it reflects the average Canadian in its lifestyle and in its spending habits. Ask yourself then, are we going to vote for someone who's a pretty sharp needle, but is heading for a very large haystack in Ottawa, in order to perpetuate the problems that we've had? Or will you vote for someone who answers to God and his municipal election, and to a Prime Minister? A vote for Keith G in the upcoming federal election is a step towards returning Canada to its responsible Christian heritage. Thank you, and God bless you.
And now, Lloyd, you're next.
It would only be by chance if one of us were elected as a member of the government. The odds are against it. The odds are that the person that Delta selects as a member of Parliament will be a member of the opposition. It's important for you to recognize, and that's traditionally true, that the government is formed by the wishes of people in Quebec and Ontario, not by the wishes of the people in Delta. So it's important to recognize that when you vote for your member of parliament, that you vote for somebody with the experience and ability to act in opposition. Don Black, Dave Barrett, Nelson Reese, Jim Carr-Craddock Party that have acted very effectively as opposition members. In fact, for the last 5 years have been the only effective opposition members in Ottawa. I ask you to support me in bringing all of the politicians to Delta, all of the politicians of Delta, onto the same side of the table, working for you.
The National Party of Canada is offering something different. The National Party of Canada will not compromise Canadian sovereignty by allowing foreign interests to interfere in Canadian elections through third-party spending and funding of Canadian political parties. The National Party is the only party which will bring in legislation which says that all government contracts shall be awarded on the basis of tendering, bidding process, price, quality, reliability, and factors other than patronage and pork barrel. We will ensure that all appointments to government boards, agencies, crown corporations, and other such government institutions will be awarded on the basis of merit instead of on the basis of who gave how much money to which political party. I could go on. I'm limited to a minute. We're going to bring honesty and integrity back to this country in its elected members, and a vote for me will do exactly that. Thank you very much.
Aaron, you're up next.
I love following John Muller. Now I'm going to quote Monty Python and say, now for something completely different. I'm not going to make you any big promises. I'm not going to tell you that I can do away with the Senate with one fell swoop of a private member's bill. But I am going to tell you that what we need to do is move towards the challenges that are facing us in the 21st century. I've been door knocking for the last 6 months in Delta and asking people what they're concerned about. They're concerned about jobs, the debt and the deficit, crime, and our healthcare system. Our challenge is clear. We need to put Canadians back to work. We need to reduce the size of our crippling national deficit in a responsible way. And we need to build an industrial strategy that will ensure the future not only of ourselves, but of our children. This is not just an election. This is about our future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attendance this evening. I think that this election that we're facing today and the end of this month is probably one of the most critical elections in the history of our country. It's an election that the future of our country, I think, will change, or could very well change as a result of it. I'd ask you to carefully consider, as I'm sure you will, the issues. If you do have any further questions about myself or the party, I would ask you to please either phone or stop in the office. I'd be happy to try to answer them. And I urge you to think these things through very carefully before October 25th. Thank you.
Our sitting MP, Dr. Stan Lloyd.
Thank you very much. I certainly agree with John that this is probably one of the most important elections that Canada has ever had, and of course it's going to be one of the most interesting with the 5 different parties that are involved. I think that we as a Conservative Party have the best plan for the future of this country. We have got the financial planning that is in place that is necessary. We have a proven track record in resolving that problem. Our jobs are well. We recognize that jobs are not going to come from the glad handing of the Liberal Party, where they control of money which they are going to borrow. We also recognize that the Reform Party, with all of their promises, they recognize that they will never be responsible for putting any of their promises into practice because they are not, will never have a chance of being the government, and they can always say, well, they wouldn't let us do it. But I believe that we have a good record. I believe that the changes which we have made over the last 9 years, although at times have been unpopular, that they are the right things for the country, and that we will soon be seeing the results of those in increased trade, increased business, and a reaffirm of confidence in the Canadian economy. And I think that this is the important thing, that Canadians reestablish that confidence and pride in their country. The only way we're going to see that is through the re-election of a majority Conservative government that can carry out the plans of Kim Campbell and her new government to restore the confidence of Canadians. Thank you.
Dream on.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Tawas Business Association, I'd like to thank all of you because you've been very patient, you've been very good, and you've been extremely well behaved.